The floorboards in our kitchen were cold enough that morning that I could feel it through my stockings before I had both feet under me. It was still dark outside, that gray hour before the rooster starts sounding proud of himself, and the stove had not yet taken hold of the room. I remember the smell of damp wool and last night's ashes. Then I heard the wagon stop at the lane, and nobody was supposed to be coming that early. My sister had been married less than a full day. By every custom we knew, she should have been waking in another house, learning how her new life would sound before breakfast. Instead, she was standing at our door in her wedding dress coat, her face pale as lard, and Father said only one thing before he brought her inside. He said, "Not a word leaves this house." My name is Katie, and I share these stories because the plain life is not only quilts on a line and bread cooling on a table. It is also the hard parts people do not know how to speak about. If you have ever watched a family go quiet around something painful, you will understand this story. And if you have not, maybe this will help you listen more carefully when someone says very little. I was 19 that winter. My sister was 21. I will call her Ruth here, though that is not the name our mother used when she was worried. Ruth had always been the steady one. She could roll pie dough so thin you could see the grain of the table through it. She could hitch a horse without fuss. She remembered which neighbor liked less cinnamon, and which aunt always said she did not want coffee but did. Her wedding had been the day before, on a Thursday, because that is how many weddings were done where I grew up. The house had been awake since 3 in the morning. There were benches carried in, coffee boiling in big enamel pots, and enough plates stacked in the washroom that I thought the whole district might be coming. Ruth did not look frightened that day. She looked serious, yes, and a little far away, the way brides sometimes do when everyone is looking at them, but nobody can stand where they are standing. I remember thinking my sister looked older and younger at the same time. After the meal and the long goodbyes, she left with her husband, Samuel. He was not a stranger to us. He had sat at our table and helped stack hay the summer before. He was quiet in a way people praised, because quiet is often mistaken for goodness before anyone checks what it is hiding. I am only telling you what I saw later, and what I did not understand soon enough. That night, our house felt hollow after so many people had gone. There were crumbs under the benches and melted snow at the door. Mother washed the last cups with her sleeves pushed up, and Father counted the borrowed dishes with a pencil behind his ear. Nobody said much. There is a tiredness after a wedding that feels almost holy, as if the house has been rung like a bell and must stop vibrating before it can rest. I slept badly. Ruth's bed was empty across from mine. Her quilt was folded at the foot, the blue one she had pieced from scraps when she was 15. I kept looking at it in the dark. Before dawn, I woke to the sound of wheels. Not many sounds cut through sleep like a wagon in frozen ruts. I sat up and listened. The horse snorted outside. A door opened downstairs. Then there was Father's voice, sharp enough that I reached for my dress without thinking. By the time I got to the kitchen, Mother was already there, her braid loose down her back, one hand at her throat. Ruth stood just inside the door. Her coat was buttoned wrong. Her cap was still on, but one tie hung loose, and her hands were bare, though it was cold enough to see breath near the doorframe. She was not crying. That was the part that frightened me most. I knew Ruth's crying face. I had seen it when our grandmother died, when a colt broke its leg, when she cut her palm on a jar. This was different. Her face looked emptied out. Father shut the door behind her and slid the bolt, even though morning visitors were not expected. He looked at me, then at Mother, then at the stairs where my younger brothers were still asleep. "Not a word leaves this house," he said. Mother whispered Ruth's name. Ruth took one step toward her, and then stopped, like she had forgotten how arms worked. Mother went to her anyway. She wrapped Ruth in both arms, and for 1 second, Ruth's face folded into Mother's shoulder. No sound came out of her. Only her shoulders moved. Father told me to put water on the stove. His voice was too steady. That kind of steadiness can be its own anger. I filled the kettle, and my hands shook so badly I spilled water across the iron top. It hissed and turned to steam. Nobody scolded me. Samuel had brought her back. I had not seen him at first because he had stayed by the wagon. When Father went out, I could hear their voices through the door, but not the words. 2 men's voices, low and hard. The horse stamped. A harness ring clicked. Then the wagon moved away. I wanted to ask Ruth what happened. The question was so large inside me it felt like a stone under my tongue. But Mother kept her hand on Ruth's back and shook her head once. Not at Ruth, at me. Do not ask now, or maybe do not ask ever. At 19, I was old enough to know things, and young enough to think silence might protect a person. Ruth sat at the table in Father's chair. That alone made the room feel wrong. She looked down at her hands. There was a red mark across one wrist where a sleeve or a grip or some hard edge had pressed too long. I will not pretend to know every detail of that night, because Ruth did not tell me every detail, and some things belong first to the person who survived them. What I can say is this. She came home before daylight, changed from a bride into a daughter again, and the whole house was ordered to act like nothing had happened. By breakfast, Father had decided the story. Ruth was unwell, a stomach sickness. Too much work, too little sleep, nerves after the wedding. That was what Mother was to say if anyone asked. That was what I was to say if Aunt Lydia came by for the platters. That was what the boys were to hear if they woke and wondered why their sister was sitting by the stove. A family can be ruined by loose tongues, Father said while cutting bread. He did not look at Ruth when he said it. Mother answered him in a voice I had never heard from her before, quiet, but with iron underneath. A family can be ruined by locked mouths, too. That was the sentence I carried for years. Father did not reply. He put the knife down and went to the barn. Mother stood at the table, both hands flat on the wood, breathing through her nose like she was holding herself in place. The day went on in the cruel way days do. Cows needed milking, ashes needed carrying out. The wedding dishes had to be returned. The world did not stop because Ruth had come home with no color in her face. That is one of the hardest truths about pain in a working household. You can be breaking inside, and still the bread will burn if nobody turns it. Aunt Lydia came just after 9 with a basket over her arm. She saw Ruth through the doorway. Her eyes moved fast, taking in the coat, the pale face, the way Mother stood too close. Aunt Lydia was not foolish. She knew when a room had changed shape, but she accepted the stomach sickness story because Father was in the yard and because there were rules about what could be asked in another man's house. Poor thing, she said. Weddings tire the strongest girls. Ruth nodded. It looked painful for her to agree with a lie. After Aunt Lydia left, Ruth went upstairs. I followed with a pitcher of warm water and clean cloths. Ruth sat on her bed, the empty bed I had stared at in the night, and began unpinning her cap. Her fingers would not do it right. I set the pitcher down and helped her. For a while we did not speak. Then she said, "Do they all say it is a woman's duty to stay?" I froze with a pin between my fingers. I could have given her the answers we had grown up hearing. I could have said marriage is sacred. I could have said patience is holy. I could have said a woman's place is with her husband, because those words were stacked all around us like firewood, ready to be used whenever someone needed to keep warm beside a rule. But looking at Ruth's face, the words would not come. So I said, "I do not know." It was not brave. It was small. But it was the first honest thing I had said that morning. She looked at me then, and I saw shame in her eyes, though she had done nothing shameful. That is how silence works when it is misused. It takes the weight from the place it belongs and lays it on the person carrying too much already. For 3 days, Ruth stayed in our house. Father and 2 ministers came and went. Their boots left damp prints in the mudroom. Their voices stayed low. Mother kept us busy in other rooms. Nobody asked Ruth to sit at the table when those men were there. Nobody asked her what she wanted in front of them. On the second evening, I found her in the sewing room with the lamp turned low. A quilt was folded over the chair beside her. Ruth had her hand on the fabric, moving over the stitches without seeing them. Outside, snow tapped against the window, tiny, dry sounds like someone throwing rice. She said, "I thought once I was married I would know what to do next." I sat across from her. I remember the lamp flame making the room feel smaller than it was. "Nobody told me there would be a morning where every choice felt wrong," she said. I wanted to tell her she could stay forever. I wanted to tell her Father would protect her. I wanted to tell her the church would listen first and judge later. But I had already seen enough to know that wanting a thing did not make it true. What happened after that was not simple. People often want one clean answer. If she went back or left, if Father changed, if Samuel was punished, if the ministers were kind or hard. Real life does not always line up like a row of jars on a shelf. There were meetings, there were visits, there were afternoons when Mother came back with red eyes and said nothing while she kneaded dough too hard. There were Sundays where Ruth sat beside us and looked straight ahead while people pretended not to stare. There were also women who found quiet ways to stand near her. One neighbor brought soup. Aunt Lydia sat beside Ruth during singing and held the same note with her as if keeping her from drifting away. Father did not change overnight. I wish stories worked that way. He believed reputation was shelter, and if the house looked steady from the road, the family might survive whatever shook inside it. But I watched him struggle too. One night, after Ruth had gone upstairs, I saw him in the barn doorway, hat in his hands, looking older than he had at breakfast. Mother changed faster. She did not shout or make speeches, but she stopped letting silence be the first answer to everything. When someone asked too much, she said, "Ruth is resting with us." When Father pressed his mouth into a line, Mother did not lower her eyes. She kept standing. Ruth stayed with us through that winter. By spring, decisions had been made that were not mine to explain in detail, but Ruth did not disappear back into a story she did not choose. That mattered. The day the maple buckets came down, she laughed for the first time in a way that sounded like herself. Our little brother slipped in the mud carrying an empty pail and looked so offended by the earth that Ruth laughed before she could stop herself. Mother heard it from the porch and covered her mouth with her apron. That laugh did not fix anything, but it told us something had not been taken from her completely. I think about that morning often, especially when people ask me whether Amish life is peaceful. It can be. There is peace in chores done together, in bread made by hands that know the dough, in neighbors arriving before you have to ask, in knowing the names of the fields and the sound of your mother's steps on the stairs. But peace is not the same as quiet. Quiet can be holy, yes. It can also be a hiding place for fear. I learned that from Ruth before I had words for it. For a long time, I was angry at Father for making us stay silent. Part of me still is. I think anger can be honest when love is also honest. He was not a monster in every part of his life. He taught me how to sharpen a scythe. He prayed with his whole heart. And he still chose silence first when his daughter needed someone to choose her first. Both things can be true, and that is what makes memory hard. What I understand now is that families sometimes confuse protection with concealment. They think if nobody speaks, the wound will close on its own. But a wound closed dirty does not heal clean. It aches later. It teaches everyone in the house to step carefully around the place where truth should have been. If Ruth taught me anything, it was not to demand another person's whole story before I offer them kindness. She did not owe me every detail to deserve my belief. She did not have to explain her pain in a way that made the rest of us comfortable. She came home before daylight, and that should have been enough for us to know she needed shelter, not a script. Maybe you have a story like that in your own family. Maybe there was a room that went quiet when you walked in, or a truth everyone carried but nobody put on the table. I cannot tell you how to fix all of that. I am still learning what courage sounds like when it is not loud. But I can tell you this: silence should never be heavier than mercy. If someone comes to your door with their hands shaking, you do not begin by protecting the appearance of the house. You begin by opening the door wider. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. If these plain-spoken memories from Amish life matter to you, I would be grateful if you subscribed and came back for the next one. And I would like to ask you something, gently. Have you ever seen a family choose silence when someone needed truth? You do not have to share more than you want. Sometimes even saying, "I understand," is enough.